This is what happens when you attempt to leave high school a year early to join the NBA. And it's always unwise to seek political advice from someone who gets paid $100 million a year to bounce a ball. So keep the political commentary to yourself, or as someone once said, shut up and dribble.
Despite Fox News journalist Laura Ingram's comments intended to criticize basketball superstar LeBron James for, quote, talking politics, sports and society are inextricably linked. Today's athletes live in a highly racialized, politicized, and scrutinized world and are not aberrant from social issues just because of their physical abilities. Specifically, athletes of color are expected to play a certain role as entertainers for society despite the blatant implicit and explicit racism they must face that simply does not disappear once they enter the playing field. In this documentary, Shut Up and Dribble, we will explore this space where sports and society collide by highlighting specific examples of athletes and their involvement in societal discussions. And by doing so, we hope to illuminate various complexities of our own communities and spaces that we occupy, so that we may begin to better understand our own positionality and our ability to impact real change in these areas. Let's get started.
Before we explore our specific examples from today, we will first explore important historical constructs which frame the way our society perceives today's athletes of color. One of the major things that we talked about in class is Sterling Brown's Negro character as seen by white authors, and he sort of gives us a typology of the commonly reproduced stereotypes that we see of people of color dating back to America's slave days. The first of which is the, quote, contented slave. And this stereotype portrayed black people as docile, obedient, and like childlike and infantilized black people. And this depiction was done in order to support the notion that slavery was black people's natural condition and that they're somehow happy in this condition. And we see this today in sports, in that those who speak out are often portrayed as the opposite stereotype that Sterling Brown talks about, that's called the brute Negro. Like athletes that speak out are portrayed in this way, that they're sort of criminal or aggressive, and then those athletes of color that don't speak out are pointed to as like content, often pointing to salaries, etc.
Right, and yeah, and that kind of reminded me of the Bill O'Reilly when Michelle Obama said, I live in a house built by the slaves, and Bill O'Reilly said the slaves were all fed. That kind of spoke to what you just said, the containers of the slave, and they're somehow well fed and somehow compensated for being property in certain ways, right? I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, and we always see like that same narrative used when athletes of color try to speak out. They say, oh, you're paid millions of dollars, what are you complaining about? It's like an easy thing to point to. And then simultaneously, another stereotype that's utilized against black entertainers is the Jim Crow stereotype, the comic Negro, as Sterling Brown calls it, in which, like, historically, these Jim Crow characters were displayed with these grotesque features, and they were supposed to seem like almost ludicrous to white audiences and like out of place, but also laughing simultaneously at himself. So it provided a utility so that white audiences could laugh at people of color's pain, and have pain be read as comedic instead of like what it is. And we see this legacy very clearly today in athletes in expecting entertainment from people of color, and there's sort of an outcry when they don't deliver on that.
Yeah, going off of this seeming demand for entertainment from Black athletes and Black entertainers, another really important historical construct for us to consider when we're talking about the issue of Black athletes having their voices silenced is looking at the historical fascination with Black bodies while the simultaneous silencing of Black voices. What is arguably the most important example of this is whites using justifications of slavery through phenotypic or physiological differences, which is a false narrative. Proponents of slavery justified the forced labor of Africans by claiming that they were the only race of people built for the type of hard labor that whites required of them. This imaginary completely ignored the humanity of slaves and simply viewed them for their commercial value. This false narrative of Black bodies being physiologically and phenotypically different from whites and more well-suited to hard work and athleticism has persisted today with the rhetoric surrounding Black people and specifically Black athletes, focusing particularly on physical prowess and natural athletic ability. Additionally, Black bodies continue to be viewed for commercial value in sports and entertainment, while Black voices are silenced when they cry for civil rights and justice. And elaborating a bit more on what you mentioned with minstrel shows, just understanding that these were characters and caricatures of Black people that allowed an outlet for whites to play Black and explore their curiosities about Black people by appropriating Blackness, but in doing so they created their own imaginaries of Black people while simultaneously suppressing the voices of Black people. And finally, an example that I think we need to keep in the back of our minds while we're discussing these issues is human zoos. Human zoos are as horrible as they sound. They're places where white people could go gawk at more exotic human beings. They were set up as villages with beings reminiscent of people's homelands, where foreign people would be displayed in tacky costumes and in close proximity to wild animals. People like Sarah Bartman, more well known in her time as Hottentot Venus, were exoticized and tokenized for their phenotypical differences from whites, but once again left silenced, serving only as a subject of a white gaze.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things about the minstrel shows, right? Like, it's such a strong reduction of the human body itself because basically a group of people is being portrayed by the dominant culture, by the whites, by a completely different set of people, and that kind of public image is constantly trying to push for what you're supposed to be, what Blackness is supposed to be, this distorted, this disturbed image of what you're supposed to be. That's the message the white dominant culture is trying to send out, like, consistently throughout history, right? Like, that's why Black athleticism becomes such an important topic, and that's why sports become such an important topic, because that's where that's such a strong confrontation to the minstrel image, because that's on the other end of the spectrum, because they're expressing what they're capable of, what they can accomplish, and that.
Yeah, and I think all the things that we've talked about here, from minstrel shows to Jim Crow laws, all of this is the idea of how we have created the image of the Black body in American society, right? And maybe the last thing that we can talk about in our historical framework of that specific perception, this Black body in America, is how science has further perpetuated the stereotypes that have played into things like Jim Crow and minstrel shows and so on and so forth. Scientists in the late 19th and early 20th century claimed that Black athletes were primitive and animalistic, and that's why they were succeeding in athletic fields. During the mid-20th centuries, there became sort of this fascination with the black body itself. Scientists such as Frederick Lewis Allen began to really, as I said, fantasize over the black body and begin to study and hypothesize over different measurements about why longer forearms or bigger hands could allow a black body to have some sort of advantage in black sport. At the same time, all providing sort of a scientific finding that oftentimes have very little actual academic merit to them. But because of the academic and professional nature of the findings of these things, this form of racism was widely accepted. In America from the 19th century to the greater parts of the 20th century, that further perpetuated sort of this black body and the image that we have discussed in this historical framework here.
Yeah. And just keeping all of that in mind as we proceed with the rest of this project, just understanding how pervasive these issues have been and how they have always been present, and how they continue to present themselves when black athletes, specifically in our examples, try to use their voices to speak up for their rights and for justice, and they are continually silenced and told that they are just objects of entertainment for white audiences.
One of the first and most famous examples of black athletes being silenced and chastised for having a political opinion can be seen with the protests of the 1968 Olympics. Leading up to the historic moment that would occur in Mexico City, the United States was a country deeply divided, with many citizens discontented with the injustices the United States government was carrying out abroad with its involvement in the Vietnam War, and at home, denying justice and civil rights to its black citizens. In the same breath of air that the United States denied black athletes their civil rights, it also asked them to travel to the Olympics to compete and win medals. In response to the injustices being carried out against them, many black athletes spoke of joining a boycott of the Games, organized by sociologist Harry Edwards. The boycott never came to be, but the idea was not lost on John Carlos and Tommy Smith, who were students of Edwards at San Jose State University at the time. Wanting to use their platform to bring attention to the injustices occurring in the United States, they decided to peacefully protest at the podium. Smith, winning gold, and Carlos the bronze in the 200-meter sprint, they took to the podium with a plan. Each wearing no shoes and black socks to symbolize black poverty, and Carlos wearing black beads in remembrance of black people who had been lynched. They planned to raise their gloved fists in the air rather than place their hand on their heart. Joining them at the podium was Australian sprinter Peter Norman, who, in an act of solidarity, wore a human rights badge alongside Smith and Carlos. While during the protest, not much uproar occurred. Afterwards, Smith and Carlos were condemned by the Olympic Committee and sent home, calling the protest a deliberate and violent breach of the fundamental principles of the Olympic spirit. They returned home to sneers and death threats, being referred to as, quote, black-skinned stormtroopers. The pressure they received upon their return, Carlos claimed, would be a factor in his wife's suicide. Both were able to briefly play professional football, but their careers as track stars had been destroyed. Carlos would become a high school counselor, and Smith would go on to earn his master's in sociology, eventually teaching sociology and becoming a track coach at Santa Monica College. Today, Carlos and Smith's protest is remembered as one of the greatest moments in the fight for equal rights. But, at the time, they were demonized, ostracized, and silenced. They would not be the first or the last to see the ugly way in which America treated black athletes who used their platform to demand justice.
For all these individuals to make statements now, these individuals are the fruit of our labor. We know the consequence of being black in this nation, and we have a very serious ill that these individuals are stepping up to the plate now to say it's not about my wealth, it's not about my status as an athlete or entertainer, it's about my life and my history that I want to have corrected. My advice to speaking out against the atrocities is to stand fast for what you believe in, study what you're fighting for, why you're fighting for it, and what you're looking for in the long run, the outcome. The Hall of Justice moves slower than a snail's pace, but that still should make you have a vigorous drive towards correcting the ills of society.
Throughout Serena Williams' career, she faced pervasive racism and sexism through the tennis world's pushback to a black body in what is perceived as a white space. Her body has been over-sexualized and described as brutish and manly in many ways that connect strongly to the way that Black people have been described historically. The responses to Serena's anger during the US Open against Naomi Osaka for sexist unfair rulings, where Serena was fined an unprecedented $17,000 for slamming her racket, were no different.
She acts like a bully, and you make a career covering bullies. I mean, this is what you do for a living. You know what happens. You cannot talk to them. You cannot reason with them. You know, and that to me is what happened. And Serena got fined. Carlos Ramos, they were raining boos on him. Here's Naomi Osaka, who has done nothing wrong but play an unbelievable match.
And also, we've never seen behavior like this from Serena when she's winning. I've seen consistent pattern where Serena, when she's losing and really wants to win, instead of looking in the mirror at her own performance, not being up to par that night, she lashes out at others. Let's go back to the US Open just a few years ago. You remember she told a lineswoman, I'm gonna stuff this ball down your throat? I don't know. If this is a man, let's just double standards. So she'd be in anger management class right now.
There's no doubt.
In these clips, Serena's clearly silenced in a way of depicting her as overly emotional and as a manipulative bully for reacting in a way that many white male players have reacted in the past. Thus, clearly, the brute Negro stereotype that we discussed in our historical framework is clear in these clips and the immediate reaction from the media. Later, the cartoon image that was just shown depicts Serena in a clear Jim Crow image in order to not only brush off her activism and right to speak on gender and racial issues, but in a way that's depicting her in an infantilizing and brutish way. Thus, Serena Williams remains a constant reminder of how we silence Black athletes and how we constantly immediately respond to Black actions and Black mere presence in the white world in historically racialized ways.
What a lot of people never realized was that LeBron, as a high school student athlete, was playing games that were outselling NBA games. They're like in the high school gymnasium, you see broadcast trucks coming from all over the country trying to broadcast a high schooler's game. And back in the day, they used to pour the whole city of Akron out of power because it was not built for that kind of capacity. And LeBron James, in a certain way, was disruptive in terms of how he played the ball, and it was challenging for a white audience to perceive a Black athlete who was incredibly athletic, but also a crafty passer and a high IQ playmaker. So every time when anybody looks back to LeBron's high school career, you can notice the white audience was fascinated by this combination that they have never seen before. What started for LeBron after he was staying quiet for a few years was Trayvon. He became very outspoken after Trayvon. He first put the picture out on Twitter with the Miami Heat, all in hoodies. And and what social media allowed us to see is something never before. Like, people were sharing their experience with policing, and other people were sharing acts of police violence almost immediately.
Hey, Bob! Put your hand behind your back. You can't breathe.
We now know that Tamir Rice was killed by one shot to the left side of his abdomen.
We got pulled over for a busted tail light in the back. And the police, he's covered. He ain't killed my.
So what happened with LeBron was what was happening to a lot of us. We were seeing footages and images that we had never seen before. And what LeBron said was, a lot of Black fathers were saying at the same time was, that could not be my son.
We want an arrest, we wanted a conviction, and we want him sentenced for the murder of our son.
Neighborhood watch captain in Florida shot and killed an unarmed 17-year-old.
I'm sitting there and I'm reading all these different articles. I'm seeing all this different play-by-play. I'm seeing all this different stuff of what happened, what didn't happen, what could have happened to prevent this, and I just started to think about my boys, my sons.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And, you know, I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves, and that we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
In 2019, you can't talk about LeBron without talking about a figure like Nipsey Hussle. After Nipsey Hussle made it out of the ghetto, the first thing he did was to buy properties, stores, commercial estates in Compton, around Crenshaw. I used to live on the north side of Crenshaw, and you could see Nipsey Hussle physically being there. He would pick up homeless people of color off the street and take them to barbershops, take them to restaurants, because he knew LAPD at the time was practicing their rookies by arresting homeless people of color. And Nipsey Hussle was doing so many things, and that's that kind of activism coming out of the entertainment business, just like what LeBron is doing with his school and the fight to bring awareness to police brutality and issues like that. These stories are just a small sample of the larger picture of the suppression of minorities and minority voices in this country for decades. In no way does this conversation here do justice to even address the systematic racism still present today in seemingly every corner of life for people of differences. But by examining the stories of Smith, Carlos, Williams, and James, we are able to enter this space using sport as an opportunity to view the world that we live in. And that's the real value here, because on one level, sports are just a game. See, the relevance of the score of a basketball game or the outcome of an 800-meter sprint are truly minuscule in importance in comparison to issues such as police brutality or systematic oppression. But therein lies the innate beauty of sport, because in theory, it is simplistic. It is fair competition. It relies on the strength of teamwork and inclusion. And in the end, it should not matter your skin color or your religious beliefs or your political affiliation. But when it does, as it has so often, when sport becomes tainted by the same systematic racism and discrimination that touches so many other facets of the lives of people of differences, it becomes so much more than just a game. Because in that game, there are only two teams: those who oppose and fight against such blatant bigotism and the system which imposes it, and those who do not. So no longer can we accept the stereotype of the quote-unquote dumb jock. No longer can we just enjoy the game and forget about everything else for 3 hours. We must read, we must listen some more, and we must find where we stand and then stand there firmly. Just as Kaepernick, James, Williams, and so many others have decided that their voices must be heard, that they are much more than just athletes, that they will not shut up and dribble. We too, from the high school dreamer to the season ticket holder, must enter the space to support, to listen, and to fight for the rights of all those who are mistreated. Because here's the bottom line. This is the reality. The clock is ticking. There's not much time left. So are you going to enter the ring, or are you just going to
think we should just have a poop reveal. Sorry.
We can definitely make that. Wait, always keep the camera rolling. You never know what's going to happen.
One more time.
You got it.
Thomas.
Don't worry. Okay.
Fuck.
Okay, take 2. Let's go.
You got it.
Gosh, we do this part.
What did I write? I know. I was like.